Okay, hello guys. Now we're moving on to the peripheral nervous system. Remember, peripheral means off to the side. Think of like peripheral vision. It's everything off to the side. So it's going to include pretty much everything except for the brain and the spinal cord. The brain and the spinal cord are part of the central nervous system. It includes nerves here and then also the ganglion. Okay, so let's review what those means. So in the peripheral nervous system, you've got your nerves and your ganglion. Which one of those two includes the cell bodies of the neurons? Those would be the ganglia, which is the plural form of ganglion. So ganglia, pretty much what they are, just collections of groups of cell bodies within the peripheral nervous system. That's all that means. And so which ones would include the axons then? Then they would be the nerves. Okay, so if you need to, you might want to go back to the nervous system overview and review the structure of the nerves. Okay, so basically they're just bundles of axons that are bundled with some layers of connective tissue. Okay, so today what we're going to talk about now is we're going to go into the cranial nerves first, and then the second lecture for the second lecture piece is going to talk about the spinal nerves. So when we say cranial nerves, what that means is they're emerging directly off of the brain and not the spinal cord. Okay, so they're coming from the brain, not the spinal cord. There are 12 paired cranial nerves, and there's two parts to their name. The first part of their name has to do with their function or sometimes with their structure. For example, trigeminal nerve, that comes from the structure that it has three branches. Usually it has to do with the function of the nerve. That's the first part of the name. And then you'll also notice that they all have these numbers on it. Those numbers are just the order that they're found from anterior to posterior. Okay, so olfactory would be the very first one here. You can think about, because that's the first thing that you touch when you're going towards your face, and then all the way to the back, 1 through 12. Okay, so for me, I think that the name part is more important than the number part. So focus on learning the names of the cranial nerves. I won't ask you about the numbers of the cranial nerves. Okay, so let's, instead of just kind of going 1 through 12, I think it's more interesting to sort of group them by function. So what I want to do is go through the cranial nerves based on their function. And so we're going to start off with sensory, so cranial nerves that carry sensory information. Now, many of these cranial nerves are mixed, which means they can carry both sensory information and motor information. So we're going to talk about some of these nerves multiple times. So let's start with ones that are related to the senses. Since the first one is olfactory, we're going to start with the olfactory nerve, and the olfactory nerve is going to carry sensory information from sense of smell. So olfaction is smell, and there is one structure I need you to know. So this enlarged fat piece of so this whole thing is the olfactory nerve. The enlarged end of the olfactory nerve is called the olfactory bulb. Okay, so here we have, sorry, I should say this whole thing is the olfactory tract, sorry. So here we have the olfactory nerves. So here, the roof of the nasal cavity, you've got a bunch of sensory neurons that stick out. Those sensory neurons create the olfactory nerves. And those olfactory nerves are going to go through tiny, tiny little holes or foramina, which are found in which bone structure? That would be the cribriform plate. So those olfactory nerves will go through the cribriform plate, synapse or connect to the olfactory bulb, and then the olfactory bulb will take that information towards the olfactory tract, which brings the information in. So let's talk briefly about the difference between a tract and a nerve. A tract is part of the brain, and so that would be anything that's really, really stuck on as part of the brain. That's part of the central nervous system. That is a tract, and a nerve would be part of the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so the olfactory nerves going up to the olfactory bulb, those would be nerves because they're part of the peripheral nervous system. And this part right here is part of the brain. If you were, it's really kind of stuck on. That makes so that's an olfactory tract. Okay, on to eyes. Okay, so nose first. Then the next thing you're going to come in contact with eyes. And so the second cranial nerve is the optic nerve. And the optic nerve is going to carry sensory information from the eyes into the brain. So here we have the optic nerves coming in. And one piece of information I need you to know is that the optic nerve is going to go across to the opposite cerebral hemisphere of the eye. So the eye will be over here, and the information will cross towards the other hemisphere of the cerebrum. So the point where they cross is called the optic chiasma, or chiasm sometimes. And chiasma means cross, so it's just the point where the information cross. At the other side of it, if this is a nerve, part of the peripheral nervous system, this part right here would be the optic tract. So optic nerve, cross, optic chiasma, other side, optic tract. Okay, into the inner ear. There are two senses that are found in the inner ear. You have your sense of hearing. The sense of hearing, the receptors for sense of hearing are going to be found in a structure called the cochlea. The cochlea, we'll learn about that more later. And then the sense of balance or equilibrium, so how, your sense of balance and your understanding of gravity, those are going to be housed in a different structure that's called the vestibule. Okay, so you have two sensory information coming. One from the cochlea that carries hearing information, and then one from the vestibule that's going to carry equilibrium or balance information. Those two pieces are going to combine together to create the vestibular cochlear nerve. So vestibulo as in vestibule, and then cochlear as in cochlea. So both equilibrium and hearing information is going to travel together through the vestibular cochlear nerve, and then that will go into the brain. And you're going to find the vestibular cochlear nerve at the junction between the pons, which is the first big bump of the brainstem, and the medulla oblongata, which is the smaller bump underneath that. Okay, so it kind of goes in right where they are together. Okay, taste. Okay, so when you're looking at the sense of taste, there are three nerves that carry sensory information from the mouth that brings taste information. Most of the information is going to come from the facial nerve, which is cranial nerve number 7. So 5, 6, 7, number 7 there. And so the first 2/3, so most of your tongue, that is going to be covered by the facial nerve that'll take the information to the brain. And then the back 1/3, so way there back in the back of your tongue, that's going to be covered by a different nerve called the glossopharyngeal. So for those of you who have your prefix lists, you want to add glossal to that. Glossal means tongue, so, and pharynx as in back of the throat. So it's the tongue near the back of the throat. So the glossopharyngeal, and that would be cranial nerve 9. So if you have an X, that's a 10. If the one's on this side, that means it's 1 less than 10, so that's 9. So cranial nerve number 9, glossopharyngeal, is just the back 1/3, or the very, very back part of your tongue. And then you also have some taste sensation in the sort of the arch in the back of your throat. That's going to be covered by the vagus nerve, which is nerve number 10. Okay, so the vagus nerve covers the oropharynx, which is just the very, very back part of your throat in your mouth area. Okay, so 3 different cranial nerves carry taste information from different parts of your mouth. I did want to go ahead and point out that all 3 of these nerves are mixed nerves, which means they carry both sensory information and motor information. So we're going to see these again as we go through. And the vagus one especially does have does a lot of things in the body. For example, it can regulate heart rates. It's also involved in reflexes such as secretion of gastric juices in the stomach. So that vagus nerve is very common throughout the body. Okay, trigeminal. So let's talk about what I mean by general sensation first. So general sensation means body-wide sensation. The best way to think about it is the kind of information that you get kind of through your skin that just sort of all over your body. It's not localized to any particular sense organ, so no eyes or ears or no taste, that kind of thing. So those are things like sense of touch or pressure or changes in temperature, that kind of stuff, information that you get through your skin. So if you're talking about the general sensation of the facial area, which has a lot of sensory neurons in it, that's going to be covered by the trigeminal nerve. And the trigeminal nerve is called that because it has 3 branches. Okay, so it has one big trigeminal nerve. That's the really, really big one right here. It's located just lateral to the pons. So here would be the pons right there. This is the medulla oblongata. On the side right here, this is the trigeminal nerve, and it's really big and fat because it has 3 branches that kind of merge together to form the trigeminal nerve. Okay, so this trigeminal nerve is named by its structure, not really its function, and it's for general sensation and touch and pressure and temperature on your face. Okay, so let's go into cranial nerves for motor movements. So remember when I say motor movements, motor means commands out. So it's going to tell skeletal muscles to move. So let's start with moving around your face. So making expressions, the facial expressions, those are all going to be controlled by one nerve, and that one nerve has many, many branches, and they go to each one of those skeletal muscles, and that is the facial nerve. And facial nerve is nerve number 7, so 5, 6, 7, number 7, and that's going to control all of the facial expressions and allow you to talk and move your face around. That is the facial nerve. Where else have we seen the facial nerve already? It's a mixed nerve, which means it has sensory information as well. And it's also found because it can take taste information from the front part of your tongue to your brain. Okay. Moving the eyes around. Now this is a little bit complicated because you have 6 different extrinsic eye muscles, so eye muscles on the outside of your eye, and those 6 are going to be controlled by 3 different nerves. We have the ocular motor nerve, oculo as in eye, motor as in move, trochlear nerve, and I'll explain where that name comes from, and the abducens nerve, and again I'll explain where that nerve comes from. Okay, so 3, 4, and 6. There are 6 extrinsic eye muscles. We have the superior rectus muscle, the inferior rectus muscle, the medial rectus muscle, the lateral rectus muscle. When you see the word rectus, you may have seen that already when we talked about muscles. For muscles, it meant parallel to the midline. For this one here, it just means linear. So the superior rectus muscles pull the eyes straight up in a linear way. The inferior straight down, medial straight to the medial side, and lateral straight out. Okay, so those are going to be straight with no rotations. Then you have 2 oblique muscles. You have the superior oblique and the inferior oblique. Oblique means at an angle, and those are going to be for rotations. Now, let's return back to the cranial nerves. For the ocular motor nerve, so that's nerve number 3, that's going to control the superior rectus muscle, the inferior rectus muscle, and then the medius rectus muscle. So most of those rectus muscles will be controlled by the ocular motor nerve. It also controls the inferior oblique, so this one right down here. Okay, so 4 out of the 6 extrinsic eye muscles will be controlled by the ocular motor nerve. And then the other 2 are going to be controlled by different nerves. So let's start with the lateral rectus muscle. So lateral, again, rectus means straight. There's no rotation here. And so the lateral rectus muscle, what it does is when it contracts, it pulls the eye muscle, the whole eyeball to the outside, to the lateral plane. And that's basically abducting the eye, right? Because you're moving away from the midline. So the lateral rectus muscle is going to abduct, like take away from the midline, the eye. So because it is abducting the eye, that's where the name abducens comes from. So the abducens nerve controls the lateral rectus muscle that abducts the eye, takes it away from the midline. And then the other one that's unique is the superior oblique muscle. The superior oblique muscle is going to be controlled by the trochlear nerve. So let's talk about where that name comes from. So the structure of the superior oblique muscle is that it has a very long tendon. And this tendon, it pulls through a little loop of ligament that's called the trochlea. Now, trochlea just means a pulley. So it creates a pulley system that increases the amount of force or leverage that muscle can have on the eye muscle. So what that does is it helps rotate the eye medially, so down and medially. And that because of that special little trochlea, that's where the name trochlear nerve comes from. So trochlear nerve, nerve number 4, that's going to control just the superior oblique muscle. So the ocular motor nerve also controls the iris. And if you look at your eye, so in your eye you have the dark part, that's the pupil, that's just a hole in the iris. And the function of the iris is to constrict or dilate to control the amount of light that's entering into the eye. So the color part of your eye, that is the iris. And so the nerve that controls the constriction or dilation of the iris is the ocular motor nerve. Okay, so it's the same one that we just saw over here. Those are the ones that control linear movements through the rectus muscles. The ocular motor nerve also controls controls the size of the pupil by constricting or dilating. So the question is why? Why do you think the iris would change the size of the pupil? Okay, so it has to do with the amount of light, right? If you have too much light coming into the eye, you can damage the photoreceptors, which are found at the back of the eye, and you don't want to do that. So you need to protect them by limiting the amount of light that can enter the eye. And also if you're in low light, say it's nighttime, you want to dilate that out as much as possible so that you can get as much light into it so you can activate the photoreceptors so that you can still see. So you need to control the amount of light so that the photoreceptors are protected, but there's enough light to actually activate those photoreceptors. And you can see this in the pupillary reflex. So if you take a person, get them used to the dark, and then shine a light into their eye, you're going to see the pupil constrict. And that's going to help protect the photoreceptors in the back. So what happens here is the light will go in, it'll activate those photoreceptors. Those photoreceptors will then send that information through the optic nerve. Remember, that's the sensory information bringing visual information to the brain. So that would be the afferent pathway. And then from there, it'll the integration in the brain, and that'll come back out through the ocular motor nerve, and the ocular motor nerve is going to cause the iris to constrict, and that will limit it, and that's what makes the pupil get really small. So the afferent pathway would be the optic nerve, afferent as in going towards the brain, and then the efferent pathway, also known as the motor pathway, that would be the ocular motor nerve, and what that's going to do is that's going to cause the iris to constrict. So I especially like to talk about this pupillary reflex because if you are going on to physiology, it will definitely come back. So there you go, new information just for you. Okay, so if we needed to list 2 motor responses carried out by the ocular motor nerve, what would that be? Okay, so 2 things. The first is it's going to control the rectus extrinsic eye muscles. Remember, those are all of them linear movements. So up, down, out, in, no rolling at all. And then the other thing that it controls is the size of the pupil, how much it constricts and dilates. The two motor responses carried out by the oculomotor nerve. Okay, so let's talk about how we move the tongue. So if you think, especially when you're talking, you feel a lot of different types of movements in there, and that is all controlled by the hypoglossal. So we've seen glossal before. What does glossal mean? Glossal means tongue, and then hypo means below. It's the opposite of hyper. So if you're hyperactive, you're extra active. Hypoactive would be less active. So hypo is below. And so what this is a nerve that is below the tongue, hence the name, and it controls the movement of the tongue. So remember, this would be motor responses, not sensory information. The hypoglossal tongue just moves the hypoglossal nerve, just moves the tongue, but it doesn't bring any taste information to the brain. Now, we've seen this word hypoglossal before. Okay, which bone feature does the hypoglossal nerve exit through, I should say? That would be the hypoglossal canal. So here is the forma magnum, the big hole. Here are the occipital condyles running underneath it. I like to think of it like water going under a bridge. That would be the hypoglossal canal, and so that's where it would exit through. Okay, so what I want you to do right now is go ahead and pause the video, and I want you to try to figure out which damage to which of these nerves, and sometimes there's more than one nerve that may apply, that might result in each of those symptoms. So think about, well, what is the function of that nerve, and then what would happen if something went wrong with that nerve. Okay, so go ahead and pause it, and then we're going to come back. Okay, let's go through it together. So, sense of taste. There are 3 nerves that take sensory information from your taste buds to your brain, right? What would be the nerve that covers the front part of your tongue? That would be the facial nerve. And then the nerve that covers the back part of your tongue would be the glossopharyngeal. Remember, glosso means tongue, pharyngeal means throat. So the tongue part near the throat. And then the vagus nerve, that covers just the arch part of the very back. The fauces is what that's called, in the very back of the mouth. Okay, so you actually do have some taste sensory, some taste perception just from the back of your throat. Okay, so what would be damaged if the pupils can't constrict? There's 2 answers for this, because you have to think about bringing sensory information in, or you could also think about damage to bring motor information out. So if it was, what would bring sensory information in from the retina to the brain? That would be the optic nerve. And then the motor information out to cause the pupils to constrict, that would be the ocular motor nerve. Damage to either one of these would cause an abnormal pupil response where it wouldn't constrict when you shine the light into it. Okay, so facial muscle paralysis. Paralysis means it can't move. So we're looking for something that takes motor information to the facial nerves, to the face muscles, and causes facial expression. Starts with an F. That would be the facial nerve. Okay, so what brings general sense of touch and pressure and temperature on the face? Starts with a T. Trigeminal. So the trigeminal nerve brings sensory information towards the brain. Okay, so again, touch. Deafness. Ooh, deafness. Okay, so there is one nerve that carries both equilibrium and hearing. So that would be the vestibular cochlear nerve. And then blindness. Blindness means that you're not bringing the photoreceptor information to the eye. So you need a sensory nerve that brings visual information to the eye. That would be the optic nerve. Ooh, so I hope you did okay on this, because this is some challenging stuff. And so I really want you to have a deep understanding of the function of those cranial nerves and how that might be affected if there was something wrong with it. Okay, that's enough for now. I'll see you again soon.